NFL free agency is officially underway, and there has already been a ton of signings. A couple of teams have already made significant improvements to their roster and will almost certainly win more games in 2023 than they did in 2022. Looking directly at you, Chicago and Houston. And in today's video, we are going to discuss the biggest winners and losers so far of NFL free agency. This will be a combination of players and teams, and full transparency, this is not a ranking of winners and losers, and not every team and every signing will be covered in today's video. But there is a lot to dive into, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video with one of the biggest winners of free agency so far, and it's the Denver Broncos. Obviously, the 2022 season didn't go according to plan as they finished with a bottom 5 record in the NFL, and Seattle now has a top 5 pick. Nathaniel Hackett was not the answer at head coach, and he was fired before season's end. They proceeded to hire Sean Payton as the team's next head coach and immediately went to work on the first day of free agency. What's important to note for the Broncos is their defense was dominant for most of the 2022 season. So for them to go out and sign right tackle Mike McGlinchey and guard Ben Powers on the first day of free agency was a home run. Signing one of the two to help out the offensive line would have been awesome, let alone both. I do think Russell Wilson will be a lot better in 2023 than he was last year, and it starts up front. Ben Powers had an excellent 2022 season for the Ravens as he allowed a grand total of 0 sacks in 2022. He allowed just 12 pressures in nearly 600 pass blocking snaps, and keeping Russell Wilson clean is huge for this team. McGlinchey can certainly run hot and cold, but from week 10 on of last season, he allowed a singular sack, which was a span of 9 games, meaning over half of the season. The big thing to remember with both McGlinchey and Powers is they're not perfect players, as nobody is, but they give you so much more of a chance to compete, and especially in McGlinchey's case, a great run-blocking tackle. Javonte Williams will be back in 2023 as he is coming off of a torn ACL, and he had to have been thrilled with how day one of free agency went for them. But it wasn't just on the offensive side of the ball either. They also signed Zach Allen from the Cardinals, and if you've watched any video on this channel before, then you probably have heard me say the interior part of the offensive or defensive line generally takes some time to develop, and Zach Allen is a perfect example of this. He's improved every year in the NFL and finished 2022 with 5.5 sacks. The initial deal looked like a lot as they agreed to a 3-year deal worth a little north of $45 million, and that is a lot, but the thing to remember with not only Zach Allen but with everyone, guarantees are what matters most. And for Denver to get a player who can certainly push the pocket and rush from the interior is huge. Will Zach be a 12-sack player for them? No, absolutely not, but what he will do is get into the grill of Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert and make them uncomfortable in the pocket. And for Denver to acquire a player like that, along with 2 good starting offensive linemen, is nothing short of a grand slam on the first day of free agency. With 2 new starters on the offensive line, yes, it will take some time to gel and to build chemistry, but I absolutely love what the Broncos did to improve their roster. Next up is the Minnesota Vikings, and this is for a few separate reasons. When GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah took over as the general manager, he, like a lot of other GMs when they start to build their team, will a lot of the time have to clean up a prior GM's mess. And by mess, I mean overpaid players on large contracts and things of this nature. Within the past few weeks, he had to make the tough decisions to release Eric Kendricks and Adam Thielen, and since Kendricks has signed with the Chargers. But what infuriated me was not only letting Patrick Peterson walk, a player who has praised Minnesota time and time again about how much he loves playing there and loves everything about the organization, and letting corner Cameron Sutton go to the division rival Lions. Terrific signing by the Lions, by the way. The Vikings then proceeded to sign blocking tight end Josh Oliver and Marcus Davenport to what were essentially prove-it deals, and while I think Oliver could bring some advantageous situations to the team, specifically on the goal line, Why not go after a corner or even multiple? And to be clear, they still could. I was just very underwhelmed on the first day of free agency from what the Vikings both did and did not do. Dalvin Tomlinson also went to Cleveland, and good for him for getting a payday, as there was no way Minnesota was going to match a 4-year, $57 million contract that the Browns gave him. I also thought it was a great signing for Cleveland too, because they needed another presence on the defensive line in the absolute worst way. Kendricks was a cap casualty before getting cut, and I understand that, but to prioritize a blocking tight end over a corner to me was baffling, especially when draft capital is very limited this year because of trading a second-round pick for tight end TJ Hockenson. And I'm not mad at trading a second-round pick for TJ, as if you want to acquire better players, there's obviously going to be a cost to it, but I was underwhelmed at the team's first day of free agency. Losing 4 defensive starters, even for as bad as the Vikings defense was in 2022, was alarming. One positive thing I will say is I liked the Marcus Davenport signing, and I know a lot of people will say he had half a sack last year, which is true, but it's a 1-year prove-it deal. If he in fact proves it and has a 10 or 11 sack season, which is possible because he had 9 sacks in 2021, then it will 100% be worth it. Guys generally play better in contract years because they want a long-term contract, meaning if they play good in the contract year, then they will earn a long-term deal, meaning more guaranteed money. He will also be 27 years old, and the big thing with Davenport, and one thing that's followed him his whole career, is potential. And if it can be unleashed, then it's a great signing. And even if it's not and he proves to be a dud, I have no problem giving a player that's shown a lot of flashes at the NFL level a 1-year prove-it deal. Full transparency, when I was editing this video, the Vikings signed former Cardinals corner Byron Murphy. They still need help in the trenches, as there were times they got flat out bullied last year, see the Philly game for example, but I do think Byron Murphy could prove to be one of the most underrated free agent signings in the 2023 class. And having a secondary of Murphy, who is just 25 years old, Andrew Booth, and Lewis Cine, I really like what the Vikings have cooking back there, and I am eager to see what Kwesi does in the defensive trenches. And from Minnesota to Las Vegas, we go to discuss the Raiders and a couple of their signings. This is a little more complicated than just saying Jimmy G won't bring a Super Bowl to Las Vegas and leaving it at that. This franchise, along with the Broncos and Chargers, has to figure out a way to beat Patrick Mahomes, or at least game plan around that every offseason for the foreseeable future. Because remember, when you have to get to the playoffs, the first step is to win your division. Easier said than done, of course. I just don't understand moving on from Derek Carr to bring in Jimmy G and think that will take care of it. Sure, Jimmy won't turn the ball over as much as Derek, but I don't see the vision with this organization. I like the Jakobi Meyers signing, as it was a 3-year deal worth up to $33 million, with 21 of it being guaranteed. For him to be Davante Adams' Robin in that offense is tremendous value, and I really do think Jakobi can flourish in this role. But it all goes back to, how can we become division champs? I don't think Jimmy G is the answer, and thinking out loud, it's easy to say they have Davante, now Jakobi Meyers, and Josh Jacobs. But this team just went 6-11 with a head coach I have zero trust in Josh McDaniels, and then signed Jimmy G, who is not a game-altering, franchise-changing quarterback. I did like the Marcus Epps signing, and I thought they got a lot of value there, as getting him on a 2-year deal for only $12 million total, to me at least, was a steal, but I've been perpetually underwhelmed with this franchise for the past few years, and I don't think signing Jimmy is the answer. To me, I don't understand what the Raiders' game plan is each and every offseason. The Broncos were an embarrassment in 2022, and they knew that, and more than addressed it on day one, while the Raiders signed Jimmy G and will probably go BPA when they are on the clock in late April. Putting all the eggs in the Jimmy G basket and banking on him to win in a division with Patrick, Justin Herbert, and Russ is a very interesting strategy. This truly reminds me a lot of what the Colts have done over the past few years in this regard. With some luck, the Raiders may get a top 2 or 3 defensive player in the draft if there's 4 quarterbacks taken in the top 4 picks, but that's a tall ask. This also isn't to say they're going to be a 4-win team next year, because they're not going to be. I just don't see how the 2023 Raiders are going to be all that different from the 2022 Raiders. The quarterback play isn't much different, the head coach is still very underwhelming, and they're still in arguably the toughest division in all of football. The guarantees are what matters most in the deal, and the reason we bring that up is because it's time to talk about the Chicago Bears. They have had a good week and some change, and the first day of free agency was great for them. Tremaine Edmunds signed a 4-year, $72 million deal with $50 guaranteed, and I love this deal for them because they had money to spend, and they improved their team quite a bit. Acquiring both Tremaine and TJ Edwards is huge for getting pieces on Matt Eberflus's defense, along with protecting Justin Fields in guard Nate Davis. We really went in depth with what Chicago can do from a draft standpoint in a video that was released Monday, but I love when a team improves their roster like this with a quarterback on the rookie scale. They gave up the most points in the NFL last season, and having a 6'5" linebacker in Edmunds in the middle of the field causes a lot of problems for opposing offenses. If he drops into zone coverage rather than cover a tight end man-to-man, you cannot throw over him, and if you try to, you run the risk of him simply going up to get the football, or of him deflecting a pass right into the arms of a nearby defender. I was admittedly very critical of the Bears draft last year, as I did not like prioritizing corner Kyler Gordon and safety Jaquan Brisker over a receiver in the second round and over a player that they could have drafted in George Pickens, but now that they have DJ Moore along with everything else, you can really start to see this team come together. They still need help on the defensive line, and they will address that at some point, but I loved what Chicago did, and sure, you can argue they overpaid Tremaine Edmunds, but I don't think it matters for them specifically because they don't have anybody else to pay at the moment, meaning they're not going to let someone walk in free agency like the Bengals just did with Jesse Bates because they simply can't afford them. I was very skeptical of Ryan Poles up until he made the big trade, but since then it's been hit after hit after hit, and for the first time in a while, I truly love what the Bears are doing, and I thought they exited day one of free agency as a big winner. The 49ers acquiring Javon Hargrave was huge, as they now have a defensive line of Nick Bosa, the 2022 Defensive Player of the Year, Javon Hargrave, Eric Armstead, and 2022 second-round pick Drake Jackson. It will be hell for opposing offensive lines every single week because they will essentially ask the question, where do we send the protection and who do we keen in on to try and stop? 40 of the $84 million was guaranteed, so it is more or less a 2-year deal, but games are often won and lost in the trenches, and I absolutely loved this signing for the Niners. I was a little confused by Atlanta signing Taylor Heinicke and not even attempting to go after Lamar Jackson, but I did love the acquisition of Jesse Bates. Bates is a very good safety, and Atlanta needed help on defense in the worst way. Again, I don't agree with how they are going about the quarterback position, and there will probably be a video on this at some point. As mentioned earlier, I love the Lions signing Cam Sutton, as they have 2 first-round picks, and had they not addressed corner at least somewhere in free agency, they would have been almost guaranteed to take a corner with one of their 2 first picks, and they still could. It's just not as much of a pressing need as it was before this signing. Bobby Okereke to the Giants was a huge get for New York, as he has been one of the more underrated players across the NFL for a little while, and getting him on a 4-for-$40 deal with just 22 guaranteed was a terrific signing for the Giants. Now, that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it would mean the world and help the growth a ton. Let me know what you think in the comments, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.